So I don't know if your friends do this, but my friends, they're really weird. And hold on, let's see if this is gonna come up. Oh, there we are, yeah. So what they do is they look for pictures from your past that you're really embarrassed about, and they blast it all over Facebook. It's a cool thing to do, I guess. And so this was really effortful, because somehow Justin, Katie, Belinda, Patrick, Kim, they found my picture, but they then put it up on Apple TV for their big screen, and then took a picture around it. I mean, that's like another level. And then they blasted it up on Facebook. And this was definitely part of my awkward phase, and I had like 25 years of that, still working through it. And I remember going into high school, like in the middle of my awkward phase. I had come from a Christian junior high, which is, that's already really bad. And then you walk into high school, everyone knows each other. And immediately you see where the cool people hang out, right? There's that one table that all the other table revolves around. And you have to work up the ranks to be able to sit there. But when you're there, you're like the kings and queens of the high school. You make the rules, you set the trends, everyone wants to be like you. And every part of my being wanted to be in that cool table. And I didn't know you have to jump through hoops. I thought you could just sit there and be cool. So one day I finished up my fourth period or whatever. I ran to get food, and then I just like plotted myself down to a cool table before all the cool kids got there, right? And I was like, now I'm cool. Well, what you don't know is you can't just sit there. You gotta like be invited, right? There's like rites of passage and all these flaming hoops you have to jump through. So as I sat there the whole time, like, people are like, dude, who's this guy? Like, do you know him? Do you know him? There's this really awkward Sadie's picture of me where I take this girl that I kind of like, and we stood with the cool kids at Sadie's, but none of them knew me, but I just stood with them for the picture. And like the rest of the year, it reminds me of a TED episode, How I Met Your Mother, but people are like, who is that person, right? Name that person. And it was like super awkward. And then there's everyone else around this table, and then there's people kind of like in the trailers, right, sitting by themselves, the losers, the people who sit under the coverings of like the dugout, and they've kind of given up. They don't want to be cool anymore. They'll just be who they are. People might make fun of them or bully them or put them aside, but they're just gonna, play Dungeons and Dragons, and I don't know. They're level 40, wizards, so they're cool in that world, right? So they've just kind of been ostracized, and in some ways they've embraced the title of being an outcast. Now Jesus, when he goes into this scene in Luke chapter 15, if you have your Bibles, you could turn there with me. Luke chapter 15. He talks to these two tables. He talks to the table of the cool kids, of people that everyone wants to be around, that are invited into the circle. And then he also talks to the losers. Remember, he's a religious leader. He's kind of gaining traction and steam in his ministry. But look at the people that he's gathering. Look at the people who are sitting and leaning in to hear Jesus. In Luke chapter 15, verse 1, it says, now the tax collectors, the traitors, the people who have infiltrated the society, aligned themselves with the conquering party, the Romans, they're the ones fully rejected by their friends and family, their childhood neighborhoods. They are sitting at Jesus' feet, completely betraying their nation. And sinners, the gamblers, the prostitutes, the gangsters. Jesus goes into the trailers, into the dugouts, into the corners of this high school, and he brings all of them around him. But then the religious leaders are there as well. But hear their posture. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. Why haven't these sinners and tax collectors, why didn't they need to walk through all these rungs of being religious before they can even look us in the eye? Why is Jesus go like sitting and letting a prostitute wash his feet, or going to the house of a tax collector? Why does he let the lame man touch him and the girl with a bleeding problem touch him? Why don't they have to do all of these things in order to be cool? And the Pharisees just kind of sit there and they're steaming. They're so angry. Why is Jesus inviting these guys to the table? He should have us around him. And then Jesus tells this parable, very popular, the parable of the prodigal sons. In verse 11, remember the people that are there. He talks about a father. He talks about two sons. And then another character, I would say, in the story is the home or the house. The first son represents the sinners, the tax collectors, the people who have just given up on the system. And some of us are there, right? We've kind of, like, we haven't come to church for a long time. We're tired of Christianity. We feel like we can never make the standards that our parents or our church have set for us. And we're just like on the path of self-discovery. We're on our own spiritual journey because we don't think we can make it to that cool table. We've been rejected enough times, so we just kind of like, okay, screw this. I'm just going to do my own thing. So that's the younger son. And then we have the older son who does everything right. The Christian that wakes up at 5 a.m. to Bible study. He has Bible verses plastered on every wall. He listens to the fish and nothing else, skirts below her ankles, the whole fundamentalist movement, everything that you can do to portray yourself as a Christian, as a good Jew, that brother does. And then he starts his story, and then there's this house that represents relationship with God, represents being with God and being in love with him, being in relationship with him. I love parables because it kind of blindsides you. It takes you into a story, and before you're able to identify who you are, you've learned a lesson, and you're not able to put up your defenses. That's not true today, but that's what he was doing back then. All right, Luke chapter 15, verse 11. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had two sons. The younger son said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them." Now, it's easy just to skip through those two verses, but this was like one of the greatest insults a child can give to their father. You get your inheritance when your father dies. And so what he's really saying is that I wish you were dead so that I could have all your stuff right now. I'd rather have your things than be in relationship with you. And this word estate, where it says the father divided up his property or his estate, in the Greek it's bios, which means life. That in a very real and tangible way, this father was dividing up his very life. You see, property and identity and value and voice in society was all tied together at the time. Think about Joshua dividing up land to different tribes of the Jewish people. And you just kind of stay in that land forever, and it's part of who you are. It's your lineage. All of your parents and your parents' parents and your parents' parents, they all stayed here. There's history here. And at that time, he doesn't have he can't just liquidate half of his stocks, and give it to his son. He's literally selling off his identity. He's dividing up his property and just putting it out there for the market. He's letting go of manservants and his employees, people that he would consider as close as family. He's giving them away so that his son could have his selfish desire. And this in the Jewish culture would be completely absurd. Maybe in our culture as well. If we were to ask our parents for a half of what they own right now because we think we deserve it. I mean, back then, it would be completely reasonable for the dad to just beat the son and disown him. I mean, everyone expects this as an audience member, but then he does it. He divides up his property and he lets his son have what he wants. And that's such a gentle and kind and freeing picture of God. He doesn't keep us in relationship with him with barbed wires and electric fences. We don't go to church and he locks the door and you stay here till you are good again. He's a God who allows us to have the freedom even to walk away, even to go our own way. And it's in that same vein of freedom that he wants us to love him. So if we can't love him freely, he lets us go. In verse 13, not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set out for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. Verse 14, after he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole land, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. If you've been Christian long enough, or you try to live a moral life, I think that all of us feel this journey of sin, where we go out and we're like on self-exploration. We feel the freedom of sin, the joy of it, the pleasure of it, and it lasts for a while. Right? The Bible says that sin is pleasurable for a season. So we have this season where we get to do whatever we want, and we're experimenting and just living our lives. This young son has spent everything he has. He goes and he's just like hungry. He's thirsty. There's this famine that represents his soul. And he's just thirsting, and he gives himself to feeding pigs, which in the Jewish culture, you're just continually unclean. He's sitting in the filth, and he comes to a point of starvation where he wants to eat what the pigs are eating. Right? You feed pigs complete trash. That's what pigs eat, and he's longing for that. And I wonder in our journey into sin, if we felt all of those things. I have. Giving myself to sin, and then walking away completely empty and ashamed, sitting in filth, wanting to hide from God and community, not sure how to get back up again, and always empty. Always thirsty, always longing for more. I've never sinned and felt this deep sense of satisfaction. Have you? Have you ever sinned? Like you knew you did something wrong and you enjoyed it, but at the very end you're like, and it was still good, right? Like how many of us felt like they did something really terrible and then just ended it with, and it was a great day, right? All of us kind of feel that. Like we sin and we want it at the time, but then we're there and we just don't know what to do with all of that dirt, all of that shame. We don't know how to look ourselves in the mirror. I literally have seen myself in the mirror and had to look away. And this man is there. This son is there. So in verse 17, he comes to his senses. And he says, how many of my father's hired servants, not his sons, but the people that he's just hired, have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will go back to my father and say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he got up and went to his father. And I think we sit there, and at a certain point, if you've known the love and forgiveness of God, you know that he satisfies you. And so we kind of get back up and we look back home. And maybe some of you are at church today because you want to go home. And you haven't been home for a long time. But you're tired and you know that the life you lived left you empty, and you're just like, I'm just going to show up to one more service and see what happens. He starts his journey home and he says, he has this whole speech ready. I'm going to earn my way back. I'm going to work myself back into my dad's favor. I'm going to be one of the hired men, and I'm going to work the fields, I'm going to clean the cow dung, I'm just going to live where the servants live. And maybe one day I'll pay my father back and I could be his son again. And how many of us when we sin, come to God like that. Even those of us who know, like, yeah, Jesus forgives us, and then I tack onto that, I add to that, okay, I know you forgive me, but I'll also worship like 15 songs till I cry and have an emotional experience. Or I'll also promise to go to church like every week, but I'm a pastor, so maybe like 3 more times. I'll just show up when no one's there, right? Or we add to those things like moral activities. I'll go feed the homeless, and then I'll like pat this, like I'll rub a puppy down and tell you, you know, like we take this forgiveness and then we add all these layers on top of it. With all of our morality, with all of the good works that we want to do in order to have favor, in order to be good with God again. Or maybe in our sin, we look up at his forgiveness and we're just like, man, like, I suck. I'm so far away from God. And maybe my way back is just to continue to damage my soul. You know, just like the old Catholics, they would bring out this like whip. And when they felt guilt over their sin, they would just whip their legs and their back until they felt like they paid their price through the damage that they've done to their body. But we do that too, don't we? Man, God, I'm just a piece of crap. I can't believe I did this again. How can you love me? I shouldn't even be a Christian. Why am I even preaching? Why am I even sitting at church? And we just kind of lash our soul until we feel like we paid God back with these lashings, with the pain we bear on ourselves. Or we go the other way and we become moral. And this whole time, what we're trying to do is close this gap between where we are in our sin, our shame, and where we feel like God can forgive us. And there's that distance, we all feel it, and we're like, okay, if I just give God enough time and space, if I just do enough good, if I just lash myself hard enough, I can close this gap, and maybe here he can forgive me, maybe here. And that's what the Son is doing. He has this whole speech ready. But what does the Father do? While he was still a long way off, his Father saw him. How does he react in his heart? Is he crossing his arms and walking away? Does he see a son and is ashamed of him? No, it says that he saw him and he was filled with compassion. He runs to his son. He throws his arms around him and kisses him. Is that our picture of God when we sin? That when we turn and walk towards him, he runs towards us. That when we stand back and start our speech, he cuts us off and he just hugs us. Or do we have a picture of God that just kind of stands with his arms on his hips and, well, we'll wait for you to make up for that one. Or, okay, you're here, just keep crawling till you get here. Does our God run and hold us and hug us? Or is our God like all the other gods? Like all the other coaches and teachers and maybe aspects of our parents where we have to earn his love too? I remember being in elementary school and, I had a really hard time. I told you guys last time, failed 5th grade, all that. I was in 3rd grade and we were going through multiplication, right? Zeros were really easy because it's just 0. Got that one. Ones, pretty easy too. You put the same number, that's not the 1. And then 2s, you just add the other 2 numbers, that's not the 2. And I got stuck at 3s. Like, nothing works here, right? What's the trick? And I remember going home, and I rarely bring any A's home, and like 0, 1s, and 2s, my mom was like extremely happy because I was finally getting an A. She gave me hugs, she patted me on the back, good job, son. But then when I got the 3s, I failed, right? So I brought that home, and she was patient with me, tried to work with me. 2nd time, still kind of patient, less smiles. 3rd time, wondering why I'm not that smart. 4th time, kind of angry. Okay, all the other kids are on 6s, and I'm on 3s. And then I come home and I'm like, okay, I really want my mom to love me. So I take my failed threes test and I crumble it up and I put it into the bush. And I come home and I announce to her that I'm finally at fours. And she gives me a really big hug. And then the next day I do the same thing, but I'm at fives and sixes. And she's like tearing up, you know, like finally the son I knew I had. You know, and then there's like all these like crumbled pieces of paper in the bush. And one day she decides to trim the bush. And she just sees all of my failures. And I remember that day was completely devastating. She was so upset with me, you know, as most moms would be, so angry. And I just kind of took that whole experience and I brought it into my Christian faith. I said, God, you love me when I do well. You love me when I get spiritual A's, when I'm on my game, when I'm preaching well, when I'm not sinning. You love me then. You give me hugs and kisses then. But when I fail you, when I'm messed up, when I can't love that person, or I gossip, or I fall into lust again, you just get angry. You just kind of let me sit there until I get better, until I clean myself up, until I can get it right. But this God, this Father, He doesn't just let us sit there till we get better. He doesn't just put us on timeout until we magically become a stronger Christian. He walks to us. He kneels next to us. And He loves us there. And it's when we know and experience God's love for us in that place, true transformation happens. The distance where we put between ourselves and forgiveness is the distance where we are unloved, unknown, unchanged, unhealed. We need a God who will cross from heaven to earth. We need a God who will go from church to the street side, to the gutters, to sit with us. And we have that God. The Son starts his speech in verse 21. Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the Father says to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Kill the fattened calf. Let us have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. During those times, the robe was the sign of favor. The son had done everything wrong, has squandered a huge percentage of the life savings of his family, but his dad comes around him and gives him his own robe, and he says, you are still in my favor. Even in your dirty rags, you have favor. And then he gives him sandals. Slaves walked around bare feet, but sons had sandals. And he gave him his citizenship back. You're not a slave anymore. And then he puts a ring on his finger, which has the crest, the family crest, where you could do business and sign in business for a son. You represent me. And I wonder, in all of those things, like, do we feel like we just get it? Do we feel like God just gives those things to us? Or do we feel like we have to earn all of those things back? This father runs to his son, holds him, and says, you have my favor. You are my son. You're not a slave anymore. Meanwhile, so now the whole picture kind of turns to the older brother, the Pharisee, the religious people. He was on the field when he came near the house and he heard music and dancing. So he called to his servants and asked him, what's going on? Your brother has come home, they replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. Now notice the older brother's response. The older brother becomes angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. So he answered his father, look, all these years I have been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you've never given me even a young goat to celebrate with my friends. And when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you killed a fattened calf for him." I just want to stop here and just we're astounded by the disrespect of the younger brother, but the older brother is disrespectful as well. It's like, let's say Nina's having like her 30th birthday party or her 29th birthday party for the second time. And, we're spending a lot of money, all of our friends are there, their family's there, but no one sees me, her own husband, right? Like I'm just pouting, like not even at the balcony, I'm just in the parking lot with my arms folded. What does that say to everyone? Right? That there's something really destructive between me and Nina going on, and I'm not honoring her. I'm not even willing to sit with her in a party and put on a fake smile. This is bad. And especially in the patriarchal society, this was a huge sign of disrespect. His father comes outside, and the way he addresses his father is, "Look, hey, look at this." There's no hello, there's no type of formality. It's extremely rude and abrupt. And then think about the posture or the heart state of the older brother. He's angry. And he refuses to go in, right? He's just really upset. And then he tells his father this. He says, "I have been slaving for you. I've never disobeyed your orders. Yet you didn't even give me a young goat." And we think about the Pharisees and we think about our own religiousness. And this is kind of where it's all rooted down. The younger brother loved the wealth more than his father. And the older brother is using his father as well to gain wealth. He's trading in all of his service, all of the years of being under his father. Why? So that he could have his stuff. And his relationship with his father is broken as well. He sees himself as a slave. He sees himself as taking orders. And there's no sense of love and belonging and relationship. He has this sense of pride in him, where he talks about his younger brother, and he says, "Because this brother of yours," right? He's not my brother. This son of yours, this person you call your son, and there's this complete disassociation between himself and his brother. And I think that oftentimes, if you look deep enough in your heart, and you've gone to church long enough, and you serve God long enough, we all fall into this category. And there's parts of us that are tainted by this, where we feel like we deserve something. If we do things the right way, if we serve God long enough, if we give enough money, why did this happen to me? If you ever ask God why, and you tacked onto this the things you've done, that means that he owes you something. That means you did it not because you love him and it's out of his love. That means that you've earned something. You're entitled to something, and he didn't give it to you. You're the older brother. If you've ever looked around angrily and thought, "Man, that person's not a great Christian. This person, he's coming to church, but he's a fake. That person, he loves God, kind of, but not like I do. Because I'm missional. I know the Bible better. I'm reformed," right? That guy's not even reformed. He's pretty much going to hell. Like, if you ever thought those thoughts, you're the older brother. And we always kind of go between the two. There's this sense, though, that the older brother doesn't see himself. Because everyone around him is applauding him. Everyone around him is patting him on the back. "Man, good thing you're not like your younger brother. He's an idiot. Look at him sleeping with prostitutes. You're faithful. You wake up early. You tend the field. You obey your father. You are a good son." And we can get all of those accolades at church as well. You're a pastor. You preach great sermons or okay sermons. And you're planning a church. And no one here really knows the root of why I'm doing it. Only God and I know. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's evil. It's so easy to be the older brother, but it's marked with entitlement, with judgment, with looking around in comparison. It's marked with being angry a lot because you're doing stuff and God's not giving something back to you, because you're doing stuff and other people aren't to that caliber, because you're doing stuff and you're not the man and woman you want to be. You know, Jonathan Edwards writes this really profound piece, and then it's digested by Tim Keller, and I kind of understand it. Okay, so I'm over here, Edward, Tim Keller, and me somewhere by the trees, and he's talking about common virtue, which basically means doing something good outside of God. And he says that most people do good because either they're afraid, right? So like I don't speed on the freeway, I do speed, but I don't speed that much on the freeway because I don't want to get pulled over and pay like $500. 350 is my max, right? So I'll go like 85. But man, once I hit 90, it's a lot of money. So we oftentimes don't do moral behavior because we're afraid. We don't want the consequences of evil. We don't want to pay the price of evil, so we do good. We do good also, he suggests, because we're selfish and we're prideful. So oftentimes on the outside we're doing good, like we're sitting there serving homeless people, but later on when we're hanging out with our coworkers, like, oh, by the way, last week, what did you do? You went to play golf? I fed the homeless. I don't know, just saying. You know, like, I fed the homeless. And it could be selfish, right? The whole idea around karma is selfish. The whole idea of earning our salvation is selfish. Even earning our way back into God's favor, we're not really doing it for others. And we're not really doing it for God. We're doing it for ourselves. We're doing it out of fear. We're doing it because we're prideful. Because we want to be better than the other person. We want to stand taller than them. We want to say that I'm not like that person. I'm a man of principle. So I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to cheat. I'm not going to steal. But he goes further and he says, if our moral virtue, our common virtue is founded on fear and selfishness and pride, those are the very same roots that sin springs out of. Those are the very reasons, fear, pride, and selfishness, that we lie and cheat. And all the evils of the world comes out of that exact same place. So our morality is just nursing more evil in our heart. It's just nursing evil. And if you've lived long enough and you're not living in denial, you'll come to a point where you surprise even yourself. The thing that you hate most, the thing that you judge others the most by, the thing that you take the most pride in, you'll come to a place where you fail it. And everything that you thought you were, you realize that was rooted in evil. But all of us, how can we not be the older brother? We have to look to, see, this is like a poor example of an older brother, this man who would not let his younger brother in, who didn't want to sacrifice more of his property, because it would be his one day. Didn't want to sacrifice the fattened calf. He was saving it for his friends. He was an older brother that wouldn't let his younger brother in, that wouldn't sacrifice for him to come through the doors of the home. This parable ends with him on the outside and his younger brother on the inside. This parable ends with kind of a question mark. It ends in the air of whether the younger brother comes back in. And it's so hard. It's so